Okay, so welcome to episode 1 of the Blue Skies podcast, brought to you by the Northern Lights Air Foundation. This is a special one because we officially have our first guests for this podcast series. We have our personal mentor, as well as one of the founding members of the Northern Lights Air Foundation, Captain Cathy Fraser. And alongside her, we have her husband, Dr. Dave Williams. Hi, Cathy. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, well, thanks for having us on the show.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to see where this goes. One question we did have, though, is when you drive to the cottage, I assume it's a pretty far drive, Bancroft, from the Toronto area.
That's true.
As a family, do you guys listen to music on the way, or is it usually like a silent road trip, or what's that like?
You listen to podcasts?
Yeah.
We might listen to more podcasts after this, but usually music.
Yeah, usually music. Okay. Yeah, you're curious to know.
Yeah, so Trisha had a very interesting way of starting this one off.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to take that over.
So, given that the two of you have very extensive careers, we were hoping if, Cathy, you could introduce Dave and what he's done, a bit about himself, and then Dave can introduce you, Cathy, if you both are up for that.
And feel free to fill in any of the gaps.
Yeah.
Certainly. Dave and I met through National Lifeguard Swimming. He taught me my National Lifeguard course. We've known each other for 45 years. We dated for 7. We were married 7 years before having kids. In that time, he went from being a graduate student at McGill through medical school, 2 residencies, family and emerge medicine, and working as an emerge doc, being selected as an astronaut from a large field of candidates in Canada, and being an astronaut. And further on from there, he's been a CEO, he's been a aquanaut, he's been worked at McMaster. He's done a lot of great things.
Very, very stocked resume.
Yeah. They say like you should have your resume fit into 1 page, maybe 2. And good thing you're not hiding anywhere now.
22 if you list publications.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very impressive. Did you want to tell us about who Cathy is and introduce her?
Yeah, so I think what's really unique is that our careers paralleled each other. So as Cathy mentioned, when I started medical school, Cathy started flying in the 1980s and went through her private license, her commercial license, all the various ratings, became a flight instructor and was a designated flight test examiner, and was hired on by Air Canada in 1988, which was a really exciting moment in anyone's aviation career when you're hired on as a professional pilot. It was really, really exciting for both of us. I had actually started flying in 71, and then when Cathy and I met, I gave her all my stuff, my E6B flight computer and an old headset and things. So yeah, she started flying in the 727 as a second officer sitting sideways, and then continued with Air Canada in various positions, was on the A320 as a first officer, and then went on the 767 as a first officer, and then of course shifted to becoming a captain, was a captain on the 320-67, and finished her career as a captain on the 787, the Dreamliner, which is a pretty incredible airplane. And of course, with the modern avionics and the heads-up display, it's very nice to be able to fly that.
For anyone who's ever been to one of our Northern Lights booths, you know that Cathy's picture is right up there with the heads-up display.
Yeah, big banner.
I should mention that Dave has all of his flying ratings as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, then we'll move on to you, Cathy. What sparked that interest in aviation? I recall hearing about your journey starting in Montreal. From there to becoming a captain with Air Canada, how did that unfold?
The easiest answer is I was told I couldn't be a pilot, so that probably sparked my interest. But when I was in high school, I thought I wouldn't mind being a pilot, and the guidance counselor told me I could be an aerospace engineer or I could be a mechanic, but I couldn't fly them. My mom thought that was a ridiculous answer, so she made me call the military. And indeed, the military were not hiring women as pilots at that time. They started a year later with the Swinter program. Study of women in non-traditional roles, I believe it stood for. But I went out to the flying school. My mom made me go and ask, and they said, sure, we'll take your money. So that's how it started.
Yeah.
We grew up in the West Island. Both Dave and I grew up in the West Island in Montreal. I was in Point Claire. He was in Beaconsfield. And around there, it was Air Canada's home base, and I always just wanted to work for Air Canada. We knew a lot of people whose families were associated with the airline, and there just seemed to be a lot of pride. And so that was my initial step into it. So I did my private license in Montreal. My parents moved to Toronto, did my commercial at Buttonville, and stayed with my parents. And then did my instructor rating in Ottawa when Dave did his residency there, and became an instructor, did my multi-IFR, and then started in the job world some. I worked at numerous jobs to pay for my flying. The Bank of Mom and Dad were super helpful. Bank of Dave was super helpful. And just made it work, yeah.
I think one of the great parts about working in Ottawa was the fact you were there when everyone working in the flight school was female.
Except the AME was, yeah. But it was all female. And so the people would see those signs for the airport. They would drive all the way around this remote road around this little airport. They'd see airplanes flying. They'd come in and they'd see us in our beige flight suits. But because we were all women, they'd say, I think I'm in the wrong place.
Oh.
Wow.
So we'd say, do you want to learn to fly? You'd say, yeah. So then we said, come on in, you're in the right spot. So that was interesting. We had one male instructor on weekends, part-time, and some guys would only fly with him.
Wow.
Interesting.
And what years were you on?
83 to 85.
Yeah. It was a pivotal time as well because the first group of Canadian astronauts had been hired. They were training at R92, which is on a Rockcliffe Airport. It was an old military-style Quonset hut that had been there, and they just happened to be there, but a number of them were flying at Rockcliffe. So, in fact, Cathy said, we're having a wings dinner. We have an incredible guest speaker. Mark Garneau is going to be talking. So I came to that evening, and it was pretty exciting. It was at the end of that where he said, I think maybe you should make this as a career. Why not?
And he said to me, he said to me, I've always wanted to be an astronaut. And I was like, who are you? Like, I thought you wanted to be a doctor. You're a doctor.
Wow. Yeah. That is very interesting. How was that move from Montreal to Toronto? Was that just a decision your family had made themselves, or was that for your career and following your career?
No, that was at a time when in Quebec, most of the English companies were moving down the road, down the 401. It was kind of a sad time. Montreal was a really vibrant city. Arguably it is now again, but at the time it was, they moved for economic and employment reasons. And all of us stayed at home. Actually, our house was vacant for a year, and so we used to joke that my parents left home because my sister and brother and I lived in the house. And then, interestingly enough, an Air Canada pilot bought it from the company who had to buy the house because there were no houses selling at the time. Yeah. But
because it is a pretty big.
I guess what sparked that aviation bug in you? Was it from your family, or did you find out in another way?
No one in my family flew, and as a matter of fact, we didn't know anything about flying schools or anything. It was just I was a mother's helper for a family. He was a pilot and she was a flight attendant, and they had 2 little kids. And I can tell you that busy job kept me from wanting kids for a long time. But I did see them and see how their dynamic was. And it never occurred to me to be a flight attendant. I didn't know that women couldn't be airline pilots. But I never talked to them about their careers. So just curiosity. I was fairly active in sports, and so I thought I wanted something that, was good coordination, hands and feet. I was good at school, good at sciences, so I just thought something that would combine those 2 things. Yeah. And I wanted to be an engineer originally, but my dad was an engineer, and he was kind of an old school guy, and did not encourage me and to become an engineer. Didn't think that was quite the place for women. Ironically, he thought it was great that I wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah.
And I guess when you heard your guidance counselor tell you that you couldn't be a pilot, was that motivating or demotivating?
Oh, for me, it was definitely motivating. Yes, definitely, yeah.
Did you have a mentor during that time? Because I know a lot of these young aspiring aviators, at least with Northern Lights, what we try to focus on is matching them with mentors to help them through this journey. What was it like back then when you decided that this was a pathway? Did you have someone to talk to?
We wouldn't have defined them as mentors. They were maybe little beacons of light that you saw, and thought maybe they were doing something that you would like to do. But active mentoring, no. I would say a lot of men were very supportive of my ambition, Dave being my chief supporter. But before I knew him, the 99s, I met them. I was teaching CPR. And when I saw these great women, I was actually kind of discouraged. I was thinking of quitting. I'd had a number of instructors. It was a bit of a revolving door. I wasn't enjoying the flight training, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. It's not all easy, and it was taking longer than I thought. And so as an impatient 18 or 19-year-old, it was tough. So then when I did the CPR demo to these 99s, I thought, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. So I would say they were probably what we would call now mentors for me.
Yeah.
Well,
very interesting.
Well, Dave, I have a question for you. You've had a multifaceted career, being both an emergency physician and an astronaut. Could you share with us what led you into space exploration and what it was like to transition from medicine to becoming an astronaut with NASA? Huge job.
I had a dream of becoming an astronaut from the time I was 7 years old. 1961, when Alan Shepard lifted off to go into space, was a pretty remarkable era. And watching that whole decade of human space exploration. But I remember going to the St. Hubert Air Show. My parents took me there in the early 60s and watching the Golden Hawks, which are the precursors of the snowbirds flying. So I had this kind of dual interest. I was interested in aviation, but I was also very interested in the possibility of flying in space. I was told that's impossible. So as a kid, I said, well, why can't I fly? And because in those days, Canada did not have astronauts. So I thought, well, if I can't be an astronaut, then I want to become like Jacques Cousteau and live and work underwater and live on undersea research habitats. And Canada's famous diving doctor, Dr. Joe McGinnis, was a hero of mine back in those days. So I started scuba diving when I was 12 years old, finished the course when I was 13. And it was that interest in scuba diving and understanding physiology that then led me to saying, I want to go to university and study physiology and one day become a doctor and be able to translate that interesting information into actually seeing patients and taking care of patients. And then, of course, Cathy and I met. She was off doing a career in aviation. I think the really exciting part of our careers is that they were in parallel. So as I was getting into medical school and going through my clinical training, Cathy was getting all of her ratings. And then finally, when I finished medical school and finished my residency, I finally had enough money to start flying again. And I was, why don't we buy an airplane? Why would you buy an airplane when you can get other people to pay you to fly them, which is actually the key to success in aviation. But that was a fun time when I started flying again. And of course, that experience led me to applying to the Canadian astronaut selection in 1992. And I was very lucky to be one of the 4 successful candidates selected.
So very literally, you worked underwater and up in the sky.
Yes.
Very, very much up in the sky.
I have both frontiers covered.
Yeah. Very.
I remember at last year's Northern Lights Gala, I was helping set up, and I was talking to Capt, and I was like, "Oh, nice watch." And she was like, "It's a gift, and it's been all the way down like a very deep cave, and it's also been all the way up in space." Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, Dave's watch has been. Mine hasn't, but he has his dad's Rolex, which has been up in space.
Yes.
And
on 2 underwater missions and 2 space flights.
Wow.
So, and I took, on my last space flight, I was able to take Joe McGinnis's Rolex, and that's been to Titanic, and I took it to the space station.
he took my wings, so they look just like wings that haven't flown in space, but I got to... If they asked, I got to tell people my wings had been to space.
Yeah.
My flight wings.
So how old were the two of you when you met during that transition into the start of your career?
Yeah, late teens, early 20s.
Yeah. So a fairly young age. Okay, well, Cathy, well, both of you, I guess, even she achieved very incredible things in your respective fields that did parallel each other. Were there moments, I know we touched on this a bit, but I guess, Dave, were there moments in your early career where you felt that you were at Crossroads. So you mentioned that transition from underwater studies to how that sparked your interest with going into university. What about that jump from there to becoming an astronaut? And how did you, I guess, manage juggling multiple opportunities?
You know, I personally have found anything that's, to me, worth doing in life is generally hard to do. And when I was an undergraduate at McGill, I had really no money to be able to go to university. That's why I had to stop flying, because I couldn't afford really either or to go to university or fly. And I was working a couple of jobs trying to pay my tuition, living in an apartment that was $60 a month in an alleyway in downtown Montreal. And I realized that I had to get my act together somehow or other to be able to achieve the kinds of things that I wanted to be able to do in my life. So I basically quit work, which was very risky for me because now I had no source of income, and started studying hard at school and began to win scholarships. And in so doing, I was able to pay my tuition. And I think for many people, aviation as a dream seems insurmountable. The costs are very, very high. Technically, it can be very difficult. It requires a knowledge set that you have to learn, or a lot of complex information. Same thing, it requires eye-hand coordination, physical aptitude to be able to fly airplanes. And sometimes I think people get partway down the journey and just say, you know what, I can't do it. And I think that's where the real opportunity comes in to say, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And I know it's tough, but I'm going to work through the adversity to be able to achieve my dreams. And so often people ask me, how did you do all these things in your life? And I think it's simply a willingness to take risks that others might not do. Certainly a willingness to work harder than other people might be willing to work. But in so doing, I've been able to have some amazing experiences.
Wow. You're a great speaker.
Yes, he is.
I have to say, probably not my first podcast, but I'm thrilled to be here. It's great.
Did you want me to tackle that one?
Yeah.
Well, just, I think early on when, I mentioned it already, just the not seeing any other women doing it, bunch of instructors, just not really feeling that I could see an end in sight. My private license was probably the hardest time, that sort of at a crossroads, but Dave was very encouraging along the way. A lot of people thought that when we got engaged that I would stop flying. And I will say that's because of where they came from. It wasn't anything other than just traditionally that's what they saw people doing. And I had to really climb that hill, just recognize that some people, that's their issue, not mine, and that Dave and I both knew what we wanted for each other, and that he knew he was marrying someone who wanted to have a career as well.
I think support is definitely I think that's something you actually mentioned in your book as well, Defying Limits. I know that one of those points that you make is the community support and the engagement that you get from who's around you, and picking and choosing who's around you to support those dreams and those passions.
We were very lucky to find each other, and also to find individuals who were as passionate about the other person's career as they were about their own. And part of, our definition for success is for both of us to have vibrant, meaningful careers doing what we aspire to do, to stay together. And we've been together 45 years now. And then certainly while we're having kids, to be able to have kids that grow up and really value the interaction that we've had as parents with our children. And that's been an amazing experience.
So were you both still in school when you had gotten engaged, or was this after both of you had finished school and I guess you're fine?
We'd finished. Dave was doing a residency, and I was planning on doing a second residency in emerge medicine. And I was just continuing on. I'd done my CPL. I'd done my instructors. Yeah, so we were just at that point. And I guess I don't think I had a cargo job yet.
No, not at that point. What I think is really interesting is if you talk to people who've trained to become pilots in certain time periods in Canada, a lot of people went through Rockcliffe in their flight training in Ottawa. Of course, a lot of people went through the Ottawa Flying Club as well. In Montreal, Laurentide Aviation, pretty well everybody was flying there on the West Island of Montreal. And then, of course, in Toronto, Buttonville was such a sentinel airport. And, you could for about a 10 to 15 year time period, you could ask anybody who was a pilot, did you do a rating at Buttonville? And pretty well everybody said, oh, I did my night rating, my commercial or my private, whenever there. It was pretty exciting.
Certainly. I had an opportunity at Air Canada. A fellow came on my flight. He was my relief pilot. And he says, do you remember me? And I went, no. And he opens up his logbook and he shows me I did his intro flight at Buttonville. It was amazing and made me feel very old.
Well, it is a pretty small community. That's one thing that we've learned in our very limited years in aviation, but it is a very small community. So we've touched on struggles, challenges, and a few of those triumphs. Dave, for you, with space exploration, definitely has its inherent risks and pressures. What did you do to stay mentally and physically prepared for your mission? So Defying Limits does talk about changing your mindset. Maybe you could speak about that a little bit and how that helped you overcome some of those limits.
One of the things that most astronauts really enjoy is learning. And it's critical because you're learning so many diverse things, ranging from how to fly a supersonic jet, the T-38, to flying the space shuttle, to doing research, operating a robotic arm, doing spacewalks, etc. And I think for pretty well everyone in the astronaut program, it's this blend of physical training with ongoing training in simulators, whether it's the motion-based simulator, fixed-based simulators, and then, of course, all the knowledge-based training, the books, the studying, the exams that we go through to be able to fly. But, when you go to space, it's a pretty incredible experience, and all that knowledge and skill comes together in that unique moment when you're sitting there and lying on your back waiting for liftoff, about to have 7.5 million pounds of thrust, a controlled explosion ignite beneath you so that you're going to arrive in space 8.5 minutes later, traveling 25 times the speed of sound. Incredible. But often people say, I could never do that. And I say, well, why not? So because, I don't like taking risks. And I think the really interesting aspect of flying in space is the support you get from your family at home. And I would say arguably it's as hard, if not harder, for the family at home, because we're doing what we're trained to do. We're doing what we love to do. We're out in space doing our thing. They're hoping and praying everything's going to work out really well. We're going to come back at the end of the mission and everything will be successful. And, everyone saw what happened with Challenger in 1986. In 2003, tragically, we lost Columbia. I had 7 friends on board, 3 classmates. But after the loss of Columbia, the family would never relax until we were back on the ground. So I would say kudos to Cathy and the kids for supporting me in doing 2 space flights, 3 spacewalks, and being able to have my dream come true.
I would say that being in aviation helped, just recognizing there is risk and that safety is at the forefront, and that you can only hope that NASA was prioritizing safety just as the airlines do. So I think having that insight did help quite a bit while supporting Dave on his space journey.
Going into space is probably every kid's dream at one point in time. Could you describe a memorable moment from one of your spacewalks?
Probably the best memorable moment was my second spacewalk when I was riding on the end of the Canadarm. And generally during spacewalks, you don't have a lot of time to yourself because it's so carefully choreographed. Everything that takes 30 seconds to a minute to do is on a timeline. I was standing on the end of the robotic arm, moving down towards the payload bay of the space shuttle to pick up the gyroscope we were going to install. But standing on the end of the arm, I had nothing to do except look at the world. And I remember looking at the space shuttle with the Earth behind it, and then looking out into the black infinite void of space after this beautiful pale blue dot of our planet. And I was thinking, wow, this is absolutely incredible. Somebody should take a picture of this. And then I realized, I've got a camera. So I reached down, grabbed the camera, and with these hockey mitts that you have, and essentially hockey mitts on the end of your spacesuit arms, I was able to take a photograph, which ultimately turned up on the front cover of a book celebrating the history of the space shuttle program. But that was a pretty special moment for me when I was able to look at the Earth and reflect on the things that I've had happen in my life, all the positives, the negatives, the challenges, the support that I've had at home. And my definition of success as an astronaut was always pretty simple: to be able to make sure I do my job to the best of my ability and don't turn up on the front page of any newspaper in the world, to stay married and to have great kids. And we were able to do that.
Do you think you changed as a person between going up to your first spacewalk and when you came down, or do you think everything kind of remained the same when you were back down?
I think there's no question that flying in space changes you, and pretty well every astronaut will speak of what we call the planetary perspective when you're in space, looking back at the Earth and you realize there's no borders that separate countries, that you can see from space, and that we're truly all in this together in what I might refer to as our global village. I think what's really exciting, though, is that in aviation you can have the same experience. You're flying at a much lower altitude, but you're also getting a chance to see the world firsthand, to interact with people from different cultures who speak different languages and have different backgrounds. And you come away realizing that kind of one-on-one and in small groups, we all want the same thing. We all want to be able to enjoy life to the fullest and have these meaningful experiences that we can share with our friends and family. So I think that was one of the truly great insights that I was able to have when I was in space. And of course, that stayed with me afterwards.
Yeah. Did you feel the same way with your flights, I guess, Cathy?
Mine's a little more superficial. I really enjoyed the view, so I loved seeing the northern lights and sunrise coming up over the Atlantic in the morning, and shooting stars and seeing the space station go over. I saw the Concorde twice going the other direction, which is something amazing. I enjoyed just the physical, putting the power up and launching, taking off, and I 100% satisfaction in my job. It was just a great feeling.
It is fun to be able to share that excitement together. I think was on my first space flight. I'm in space. Cathy was flying an airplane between Toronto and Montreal, I think. So we were able to send a message from the space shuttle through the data link via dispatch that Cathy got on the flight deck of the airplane that she was flying. And I think the captain actually grabbed it and read it out to everybody on board.
And I said, "Dust, don't say love, Dave." And he goes, "Love, Dave." I still have that copy of that data link, and I thought they were joking. So dispatch sent a message saying, "We have a message from the Space Shuttle Columbia." So I said, "Beam it up." And then I got the message and I went, "Ted, this is really from Dave." And the captain actually had been invited to the launch. He couldn't make it, but he had been invited.
So I guess as a pilot, your memorable moments were more or less on every flight, looking at the views, enjoying what's outside.
Yeah, and the difference is another beautiful thing about our job is how it just every day is different. And I'm retired now, and I don't miss the sleepless nights or the feeling after a long flight, but I sure miss the absolutely incredible people that I worked with, and also the beauty of the globe and the excitement of seeing different and new places and doing a good job, being able to be satisfied at the end of every flight. You just land and you've done a job well, and it really, that instant feedback is a great feeling.
What would you say is one of the most fun or remarkable things about working in the aviation industry?
I like that no 2 days are the same, and that you make 1,000 decisions every single day. I love the fact that I knew the weather in my alternates without looking like I knew the weather in my alternates. I just always had that in the back of my mind. So you're really, it's a cerebral thing. You have to know about the aircraft. You have to know about weather. You have to know about you just have to have a lot of facts going on in your head. A lot of times the decision-making is last minute. I would say that was also really good. It kept you sharp. I loved going back to school and in the sim. And because you walk out of there and you feel like I'm prepared to do anything. If something's thrown at me, I feel ready. And I really do admire that in the training world.
We've had a lot of fun together as a couple over the years. Because we're both pilots, I think we can appreciate the aviation experience. When I was training for my first space flight, Cathy had a chance to land the space shuttle simulator, which was something very few pilots have had a chance to do, but she did a fantastic job doing that. And then for my birthday a couple of years ago, she said, I think I'm going to give you a sim session in the 787. So I got a chance to fly the 787 sim, which was a lot of fun as well.
Was that ever daunting for you? Having to make 1,000 decisions every flight? Was that ever that fear?
I think when you go through the training, you don't really realize that you're doing it, but it's just a very satisfying feeling. I think I'm a pretty modest person, but I really took a lot of pride in trying to do a good job and trying to work well with others. And a lot of the job is working well with others. Some days I would come home and Dave said, "How was your flight?" And I say, "I earned my money today." I loved going to work, but there was sometimes it was challenging. I don't think I ever found it daunting.
What was the transition from FO to captain like?
Long, but you felt prepared by the end of it. Yeah, and it's a real challenge transitioning from being a first officer where you're accommodating and facilitating to being the directive and leader. And I don't know if it's more challenging for a woman or if it was more challenging for me or if I was harder on myself, but it was a challenge, and I was proud of myself when I did it, but it was a long journey.
We were very proud of Cathy's transition to captain, and in a certain degree, it's sort of the progression in the seniority of aviation. You go from the right seat to the left seat. And many people just think, oh, well, now I'm a captain, that's that. But when you sit back and you think about the responsibility that's involved, you're flying, in the case of the 787, you're flying this huge, multi-million-dollar airplane filled with hundreds of people. And as Cathy pointed out, literally every decision is her responsibility. And, I think about what I've done as a physician and CEO and things, and it's very, very similar, the responsibility that Cathy has as a captain flying those airplanes. So it's a very big deal. And, when you have a chance to interact with people who've flown in the left seat, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a smaller corporate aircraft or a larger jet, no matter what position you're in, there's an incredible amount of teamwork and learning that goes into success.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is that as we know a lot of pilots at Seneca, but as pilots get older, they're still quite as sharp. They still know exactly what's going on. But I notice a lot of other people in other industries may not be the same. And I figure that just because you're facing new challenges every single day, that you have no choice but to be on top of it.
Well, we like to think that we're pretty sharp. Not that we're getting older or anything. Yeah.
It is harder going back to school or to relearn things or to learn new things as you get older, there's no doubt. I think that probably as a pilot, you work harder at it to make it look like it's not more challenging. But there's no doubt when you're young and sharp and astute that things come a little bit easier for sure.
Yeah, to me, I think there's no question about that. The first time I flew in space was on the original avionics on the space shuttle, which are all round dials, very similar to any military jet. And then they did what's called the multifunctional electronic display system update, so everything was basically a glass cockpit. So I had to relearn all the avionics for the space shuttle. And it's definitely a lot easier to do all that when you're younger. There's no question that as you get older, the ability to assimilate all this information is harder. And I do think also that as we get older, we tend to be more comfortable with what we're familiar with. So, nowadays, of course, everyone's learning to fly with a G1000 or some other glass-based avionics system, but going back to the good old days of round dials and actually looking out the window is also very important.
Well, the style of learning changed too, where we were given an iPad, which I'm comfortable with, but the way of learning where I used to go through the manual and highlight things and replace pages, update it, was now pushed to me in an iPad, and it's more of a passive way of learning. And so for me to absorb the information was a new style of learning. There's no doubt there was a change for me, and I preferred inherently the way I learned all the way along was to use manuals, and I felt like my retention was better. So I couldn't necessarily attribute that to being older. I would just say that new way of learning at that point in my career was a bigger challenge.
I guess you guys have seen aviation from the ground up almost, and you've seen changes throughout the years. Is there anything you're excited for in the future?
Well, I think both of us started aviation at a time when an hour of dual was $27. And now it's a little more expensive than that. So I think what's interesting is we're on the cusp of a new wave of general aviation, and people are talking about electric airplanes, Pipistrel, as you know, it's distributed in Canada by Apex Aviation. Our good friend Anna Pangrazi's been doing that. I had a chance to fly one of those electric airplanes. It's the beginning of a new era, and you are limited, there's no question, but you're limited in a gas-powered airplane as well. It's just learning how to manage the resources you have available. And also the new categories of very light sport aircraft are opening doors again. You can start flying airplanes that are a lot cheaper to operate and become a little bit more affordable to buy. And hopefully we'll continue that dynamic growth of general aviation, because without general aviation to feed professional aviation, it's very hard to find pilots to fly the big jets.
I've seen the transition from 4 to 3 to 2 engine aircraft and the controversy that went with crossing an ocean with only 2 engines. But the efficiency of the engines, it never ceases to amaze me how incredibly powerful and efficient they've come up with these engines that power our aircraft. So I look forward to that, seeing how far they can push that envelope, maybe getting back into the supersonic type of aircraft. That might be exciting. Not excited if they think they can do it with one pilot. I do not think that is a possible safety thing, safety feature that would be a completely money saving. And I think that would be a devastating thing for our industry.
Well, it's interesting because both of you experienced the transition between roundel to glass and that norm. And we're excited to see at our time when we're joining the industry what changes are coming, because definitely that conversation of one-manned aircraft and AI is on the rise. So we'll see how that conversation shifts when we're in your seats one day. Well, it's nice to hear both of your individual achievements and some memoirs there. What would you consider some great achievements for each other? So you speaking for Dave and just being his partner, watching him go through this, if you could speak on that.
Well, I think he's multi-talented. It used to be a joke with a lot of our medical crowd that they would say their husbands or wives couldn't do anything other than, cure illness or save people's lives. But I said, no, Dave's pretty good. He's pretty handy. He can do a lot of things. So then they would want to book him to come over and change a light bulb or rewire an electrical system, as it may be. He can do lots of things like fly airplanes. He's good with the kids. He's very supportive of career. I think getting accepted one of 4 out of 5,330 people, candidates, was pretty impressive, being one of less than 800 human beings in the world that have flown in outer space. I think that's pretty cool, or low Earth orbit, I guess we call it, to be accurate. I'm very proud that he got the Order of Canada. That's some of the things.
So from my perspective, Cathy started to fly at a time when it was still very, very non-traditional for women to fly. And I was really thrilled when she was hired on at Air Canada. She was the 13th female pilot hired at Air Canada, had a remarkable career. And I say that as defined by both our perception as family members, arguably we're a little biased, but also talking to many of her co-pilots and pilots she flew with over the years. Everyone I talked to said, fantastic pilot, but also phenomenal CRM in the cockpit. And of course, not everyone is great at the team aspect of flying. Not everyone is fantastic at CRM, in addition to being a really, really good pilot as well. But on top of that, what I admire about Cathy is her passion to share her interest in aviation with others. Doesn't matter whether you're male, female, she's very passionate about what she does, and she's been doing that her whole career, sharing with others her thrill and passion for flying. And I think now, as we're both at this stage in our careers, that our ability to mentor others is something that I find really, really exciting. And it's a great way to see her giving back. And we both believe very strongly in being able to give back. We've had incredible careers, want to share our experiences with others so that hopefully they can have the same sorts of things happen with their own careers.
And Dave's been a big promoter of Northern Lights Aero Foundation, and has always been there for me. And he's bought tables at our gala, and he's been involved with the mentorship program. So that's been absolutely great.
Will you be joining us this year as well?
Yes,
Okay.
I will be there.
Great.
I have an ad in the brochure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for our listeners out there, this is our 15th year anniversary. So definitely a special one for the organization, and we're excited to be there on October 5th.
Yeah, this podcast might come out before, it might come out after.
That's true. Yeah.
I guess you both have had very distinct careers. You were one of the first astronauts in Canada, and you were one of the first airline pilots in Air Canada. What do you guys think differentiated you from the rest of the bunch?
Well, I'll go first, maybe. I think when I applied to be an astronaut, I had a lot of experiences. So there was a significant number of things that I had done that they were looking for in astronaut candidates. That I had a private pilot's license and a night rating before I started. And then, of course, got all my ratings, the remaining ratings afterwards. But I was a scuba diving instructor. I'd done skydiving before. I was an emergency trauma physician. I'd done research in neuroscience. I was familiar with how to do life science research and things. And I also, when I was interviewed, spoke in both official languages, which I think is important as well, because we are role models and we do want to be able to share our experiences with everyone. So I was very fortunate, though. I think by the time you get to the final group of 20 and they're looking at individuals to select, they could have taken any one of those 20 individuals and they would have done an amazing job for Canada. So I was just thrilled to be one of those final 4.
And I would say a lot of luck and timing were in my favor. I met women just a little bit older than me, like Lorna DeBleeky and Felicity McKendry, who were not allowed. The door was shut for them to get into the airlines. And they had very long and interesting careers. But so the timing was good for me to get into aviation. When guys would ask me questions to see if I was qualified, quote unquote, I would say, I'm going to save you some time here. I'm a French-speaking female newfie who's left-handed, and I have a college degree and 3,000 hours to boot, and then sort of sit back and laugh about it. But in fact, I had the right qualifications at the right time. I will say that a coincidence, one of the doctors that Dave worked with in Emerge, his partner was an Air Canada pilot, Barb Swires, and the doctor kept saying to Dave, get Cathy to call Barb before I got into the airlines. And I didn't want to bother her. I didn't want to call her. I cold call her. Oh my gosh, I really didn't want to do that. So finally, Dave said, look, it's getting embarrassing. Derek said, call her. So I picked up the phone, and at first she was, a little bit reserved. And she said, well, you need this. And I said, well, I have that. And you need this. And I said, well, I have that. And she goes, and then she started to get kind of excited. She goes, well, have you applied? And I went, of course. And so I think she must have gone in to the secretary and just said, have you got this person's application on file? And I got a call very shortly thereafter. So I think knowing that, I think it certainly helped a little bit, but I had the right qualifications to at least get the interview. Also, when people would say, you only got hired because you're a woman, they weren't actually hiring droves of women, but I said, well, I may have got the interview because I'm a woman. I got the job because I was qualified.
Yes, that's a good way.
That's a good way to end that statement. Well, now let's shift a little. I know we were already touching a little bit about your relationship, how you both met and how that's played a role in both of your achievements. So we talked about how you first met, and you mentioned that you were both individually in school. So I assume aviation wasn't at all a part of how you met, per se?
No. Not directly in the beginning, no. I flew with Cathy as a passenger.
And I did part of your private pilot's license.
Yes. Yeah, which was a lot of fun. So we flew together on occasion, and I'd say probably did a quarter of my private license in the late 80s and things. That was a lot of fun. And the last time we flew together was in the 787 Zim.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
Now, at what point did you guys realize that your professional ambitions and your relationships could coexist?
Well, we didn't really think too much about it. We just, I think, assumed it would work. We didn't put a lot of thought into it. We just sort of kept moving forward and supporting each other's dreams. I would say quite often when one of us would have self-doubt, the other one would be the one encouraging them to go forward and to go ahead. One example of that was I was laid off from Air Canada for 2 years, and we were in Montreal, and Dave got the opportunity to be assigned to Houston to the astronaut candidate training, and he was willing to not go or to take a later date because of my job. But at the time I was laid off, and so I said to him, we're going. I don't know when I'll get recalled. This is ridiculous. You're going to get astronaut training. So we were able to just support that decision, even though I had no idea what commuting would look like. I had no idea when I'd be called back. Evan was a young man, baby, I should say, and we were moving away from all our family. But we just jumped in.
I think from my perspective, there was never a time when I did not think that we'd be able to have a relationship, a marriage, and be able to achieve our career dreams. I think a lot of it is how you phrase it and how you think about it. As Cathy said, it's not like we sat there and planned it out or anything, but I think the underlying commitment was there, and the commitment was to each other and to each other's careers. And success was defined by staying together and having both of our careers work out. And I think we're able to do that. And there's lots of ups and downs and twists and turns. It's not easy. There's a whole lot of juggling of things that go on, but it's not insurmountable. And I think that's the most important message. And for people who are just at the beginning of their careers trying to figure out how can I do this and have a family and things, it is possible. I think a lot of it depends on finding the right person, the right spouse, and making sure that that person truly is committed to their own career dreams, whatever it might be, and the other person's as well. And in that case, there really is no limit.
That is huge, yeah, having a supportive partner and recognizing the red flags if they're not supportive, and also getting rid of some of the irritants. I mean, is it possible to balance everything, to do everything equally? No, it's not. But if neither of you likes cleaning house, outsource it, get rid of an irritation. Stop arguing about something that really is a minor detail, and that's worth a lot of money. People might say, oh, you have to be rich to do that. It's not true at all. If it's taking away from your family, your relationship, what's important to you, then don't waste any amount of time arguing about it, and just be supportive of each other.
Well, you both were and still are incredibly ambitious people, have had amazing careers. How did you exactly navigate the decision to start a family while pursuing these dreams?
It's tough. I'm not sure that we consciously decided, although there was an aspect to that as well. We knew we wanted to have a family. The timing was we're not really sure when. I think it's a lot harder in the sense that professional women are often doing their training in their 20s. And, the stereotypical time to have children is in your 20s, and that is very difficult. So, in fact, when we had Evan, it was when Cathy was in her 30s and things, and, had already begun flying, and all that training element was behind us. And I think that, again, is an important element to the whole thing, looking at how to be able to achieve one's dreams. And it's not easy. I spent the better part of 10 years training to become a physician, and arguably Cathy spent the better part of a decade training to become a professional pilot. So once you're able to achieve that point, then you can start to expand and do other things. I've been very lucky. I've done a lot of things, but I don't do them simultaneously. I tend to do a lot of them sequentially, and that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I used to joke around that I killed houseplants, so I really didn't think that kids were in the cards. Dave was very supportive if I decided that was the case. But it's like a club you didn't know you wanted to be a member of when you have kids. And at work, a lot of people would say, oh, you got to have kids. And then they would say, and then you'll quit work. And so I was a little bit concerned about that. I didn't think the two were mutually exclusive, that I could continue working and have a family. And again, having a supportive partner helps that a lot, and also help. We didn't have family around, so we had a nanny, and that worked out fine. We juggled it, we made it work. But the decision to have kids, we did put it off until we were at a point that I felt that I could get a career or have a career. I was a little worried about that. I mean, to give up flying, as I've known people have in the past. And so,
Yeah, for us, I don't think that was really in the cards, giving up a career to have kids. My mother did it. She was an operating room nurse, gave up her career to be able to have children. Kathy's mother was the same thing. She was a nurse, gave up her career to have kids. So we wanted to figure out a way to have both of us have meaningful careers and still have kids. Wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it was so rewarding. And when you have kids and you watch them grow up and become little people and all the things that they're interested in, then kind of go through that teen phase where there's a few challenges and things and emerge into their 20s with a lot of successes. It's pretty incredible. We've had an amazing experience with Evan and Olivia and Theo, and it was a lot of fun going flying with Olivia. She got her private license now as her night rating. But you know how hard it is when you're a parent and you go driving with your kids, or vice versa, when you're a kid and your parents go driving with you. Well, here's Olivia flying with, the two of us. And I was in the right seat. Cathy was in the back seat. Of course, we put the most experienced pilot in the back seat. And Olivia was flying, and she did a spectacular job. Her landing was outstanding, and that made both of us very, very proud that we were able to be part of that whole experience. Whether, our careers influenced her choice, I have no idea. But it was just fun watching her be able to succeed in that dream as well.
Yeah, we're really supportive and proud of our kids, and I would say that's our biggest achievement.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that decision for the two of you panned out very nicely. And for the listeners that we do have, that things might be a little different in their situation, where maybe they're starting a family at a very critical time in their career. Let's say they're just starting out their airline, they're still in training. What advice would you give to them, especially if they have a partner that is also in the industry or in a time-critical time, a big commitment with time there? What advice could you give to those couples?
I would say try not to be doing the critical thing at the same time, that you're going to have to tag team a little bit, which we've had to do alternating schedules to a certain extent. If you have supportive family, make sure they're part of the plan. Make sure you get their concurrence before you include them in your plan. We didn't have that option, but...
Yeah, sometimes I think in aviation and other careers, people are very focused on doing the best they can do and, perfection. And of course, as pilots, we all want to have that perfect flight. As a parent, you realize sometimes you just got to go with what happens. And I remember Cathy was flying and her sister Joan was down visiting in Houston. We went to Barnes & Noble to buy books for the kids, and I'm strapping the kids into the back seat of the car, and I think it was Olivia ended up throwing up. It might have been Evan or whatever, but one of them threw up all over me and things that I'm sitting there just no big deal, wiping it all off. And Cathy's sister, who did not have kids at the time, was looking at me like, oh my goodness. But that's what it's like being a parent. You just go with the flow and deal with whatever the challenges are that you're experiencing. It is not easy, I know, and there's many very, very fatiguing nights. Going into the sim when you've been up half the night, with a crying kid is always a bit of a challenge. But outsourcing whatever you can and having family support really does make a big difference. We were, of course, in Houston and Texas. We didn't have immediate family support at all. So that's why we had a fantastic nanny and we were able to make it work.
Yeah, and you'll beat yourself up if you stay home and give up your career, and you'll beat yourself up if you go to work and you feel like your kids are not getting your 100% attention. The beauty of being an airline pilot is you can actually bid schedules to stay senior. You can choose your days on and off. So I made all the kids' field trips, even though I was based in Toronto and living in Houston. As a matter of fact, the office staff at the school didn't know I was a pilot. And I had offered up for Dave to come in and talk to the kids. And they went, oh, that's okay. We have 10 other astronauts kids here, But when they found out I was an airline pilot, they said, now, if y'all had told us that, we would have had you come talk to the kids. So I was able to help and volunteer in the school and be there for every parent-teacher night and all the field trips. So you can do it. You can juggle it and just prioritize what you can.
And I think there's an opportunity to focus on quality time with the kids. So making sure that you're reading to them every night before they go to bed, that you're interacting with them. There's nothing worse than coming home from work so tired you cannot interact with the kids. It's really important to take a couple of deep breaths and have a great evening with them and then be able to do whatever you need to do to relax and refresh. But we were fortunate we were able to do that, and I think as a result we've got an amazing group of kids.
And I missed some holidays, like I would miss some birthdays or Christmas. Again, staying senior, if you're lucky enough to be able to do that, and you can juggle it. When the kids are little, they don't know Christmas is, the 25th. It's whatever day you open all the presents and whatever. So we were able to do that a few times.
Well, while staying committed to each other, your careers, and your family together, did you ever have to make any sacrifices or prioritize different aspects?
I think the answer would be yes, but the important element in all of this is talking to each other. So when I applied to become an astronaut, Cathy and I talked about it, and she was very supportive, said, yes, apply. And I said, you do know this means, and training in Houston, pay cut, going from being a physician to being an astronaut, potential risk involved, et cetera, et cetera. And it was the same with the space flights. Every time I was assigned, we would talk about it. My underwater missions, we would talk about that as well. So communication is critical. And the person who's asking has to be willing to accept the answer if it's no. And, I've had some great CEO opportunities, but I don't really consider them because they're in a different city, would be a different move, et cetera. And sometimes we do that. Cathy chose different things in her career as a pilot so that we could stay together as a couple.
Well,
yes, I stayed senior longer than I would have. I sort of had in my mind, idea of when I'd like to be promoted or take my promotion to captain. And so I did stay senior as a first officer for longer for the better schedule. That was a good decision for our family, and no regrets about it. So,
with you, Cathy, I know you talked a little bit about this being a woman in aviation, the 13th hired Air Canada pilot. What concerns did you have about motherhood in specific? So you spoke about this as being parents, but what about you with motherhood and your career?
Well, we've seen maternity leave benefits improve dramatically. The first time I was pregnant, it worked out because I was furloughed from the airline or laid off. And so Evan was a furlough baby. The next time around, the mat leave was 4 months, and then you could take a voluntary couple extra months if it was allowed or if they didn't need you. And I went back after 4 months, and now it's a year or 18 months, depending on what the pay structure is, what you want to get paid. But so we've seen improvements there. I didn't think too much about it at the time. I've been able to maintain the flexibility. I wasn't worried about it physiologically. But yeah.
All right, Dave, from your perspective, what was it like supporting Cathy's aviation career while also managing your own intense professional life?
I think at times it may have been challenging, but I think the single word that I would use to describe it was really, really rewarding. It's hard to express the amount of pride that you have watching somebody else do what they love to do. And it doesn't matter whether that's a spouse or a kid or a relative or somebody you're mentoring, it's really fun watching people succeed at what they're able to do. In Cathy's case, I think she had a very defined, very focused goal of becoming a professional pilot and working for a major airline. And over the years, watching that come to fruition was great. And then being able to enjoy it together. Before we had kids, I remember we'd have weekends off and we'd go into the airport, go, where do you want to go this weekend? And we'd go off to London, see a play, or go to Bermuda or whatever. And that was a lot of fun. And now, of course, after having kids, we're able to do that with kids. And that's even more exciting when you're able to travel together. And the last trip that Cathy did was a flight to Rome before she retired. And we were very lucky to have the whole family on that and be able to come up to the flight deck after the final landing and, of course, see Cathy's office. It was really a great experience.
I feel fortunate that I enjoyed what I did so much, and it made it a little bit easier. The commuting was long, and we lived 45 minutes from the airport in Houston, and then a 15-minute shuttle to the airport from the lot, and then a 3-hour flight, and then I was just starting my day. So I would try and arrive rested, sleep on the flight up, and prepared for work, try and do the studying that I needed to do, etc. And that was a challenge. I did that for 13 years, and I did not complain about it. And anytime I thought I couldn't do it another day, I got 2 weeks off. I mean, the time off from the airline is generous. And I was able to make that last and then take the family. We did a lot of things together, so we reaped the benefits of airline life.
Yeah, I think it is really important to do things together as a family, including the children as well. For Cathy's last flight, as I mentioned, we were part of that. The whole family was part of that. For my last flight in the T-38, Cathy and the kids were there to hose me down with the fire hose, which is the traditional thing for a last flight in that type of airplane. And sharing in each other's careers has been a really remarkable journey. So walking around the base of the space shuttle the night before I'm about to lift off to go into space, it's a pretty incredible thing. Different perspectives, there's absolutely no question. Cathy's hoping and praying this is all going to work out. I'm like a kid in a candy store thinking, this is amazing, I'm going to go to space tomorrow. But anyway, we were very lucky to do it all together.
Now, you mentioned some smaller things, but were there any routines or rituals that you guys did together to help keep your relationship strong?
We'd make date night occasionally. Just when you're talking logistics all the time, you want to have a couple of events where you can just enjoy each other's company and not worry too much about the daily grind.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to get together, reconnect as a couple, and to be able to enjoy each other's company. And whether it was going out on a date night or, Cathy coming into Johnson Space Center and flying the space shuttle simulator, whatever, I think we have to really take joy in those moments that we have together and remember why we're together as a couple and why we enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, we got to go on a couple of trips together as well, just the two of us, and that was nice.
Yeah.
So a couple of launches together.
Yes. Yeah, often, when we had children, we'd be traveling as a family, but we would also make a point of traveling together and being able to make that balance and how things work.
Well, we're nearing the end, but again, if there's anything that you'd want to recap for or advice for young listeners out there that are looking to start a family, what advice in general would you offer, whether they be male or female, people that are in the aerospace or aviation industry? And this is definitely, at least with us, like that was a thought that I had in my mind, and that made me hesitant to join the industry along with a couple of my peers that were female. Any advice that you could offer to them?
Yeah, for sure. Well, when I went into it, of course, there were very few women, and probably that was, I did get some resistance from external sources that, this wasn't really a career for women. But if you look at the flight attendants, nobody ever suggests to them they shouldn't be a flight attendant, and they have a similar schedule, completely different job, but a similar schedule. So I often put that forward as a question when they ask me, how is that a career for a woman? I'll say, well, why don't you ask a flight attendant the same question, right? So I think it's the non-traditional aspect of it that gets people a little bit. So I would just say, don't think too much about it. Just jump on in. We've only gone from 2% to 4% to 7% at the professional pilot level. So it's making small inroads. I think this sort of thing will do a lot to encourage young women.
I think there's many things that we could say. Ultimately, I would suggest it's important not to let other people define your dreams for you. And once you've chosen a path based on the dreams and aspirations that you have, finding a partner who supports that dream is a critical element to being able to succeed. The rest of the challenges that we face can be solved by simple dialogue. And I say simple, but it's not easy. Talking through some of the challenges and trying to make decisions can be hard, especially when you have two spouses who are married to each other and they're both commercial pilots, and one gets based in one city and the other's based in another city. What do you do? And, some people may say, okay, we're going to move here and so is going to commute back and forth and then we'll switch, etc. But finding a solution that works for both people is really, really important. And it does take compromise sometimes. And I think that's where sitting back and putting in perspective the importance of relationships and careers and how we treat each other as spouses and family and things is an important balance. But overall, there's absolutely no question if you follow the journey together through the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns, the destination and the journey itself have been incredible.
I agree.
Well, I think our listeners are also the next generation of the industry. And so hopefully this next question can help spark some of that discussion. But what do you think that the industry could do to better support young families or individuals looking to start families and support women?
Well, I already think that it's quite a good industry in terms of scheduling, choices, days off, generally speaking. They could do more for maternity leave, paternity leave. I mean, I was at the airline when the first fellow at Air Canada took paternity leave, and it was not well received by his peers. I went up to him and I said, "Congratulations." And he said, I started later in life, getting married and having kids, and I'm not missing one bit of it. And I really admired that. But he faced some pushback, which is kind of an interesting perspective. But they could offer some form of job sharing. They could offer more productive pairings or rosters where people who want to just do one-day trips could do it. Right now, the schedules, you can't equate 16 days of work, like 4-day pairings in a month, to someone who goes to an office. You just can't. People are away. And if you make those more productive and have pilots working 12 days a month who are happy and able to balance family more, I think you would see greater returns and a lot less absenteeism.
Well, for me, I'm not a professional pilot in the sense that I've never flown with an airline or anything like that. As an astronaut, I'm a government employee, and the government has been very good about encouraging women and men to be able to pursue careers that they aspire to. I think overall, we've seen in the last 30 years, 40 years, in the astronaut corps a very rapid expansion of what we might call a competency-based framework. So irrespective of gender or background, it's the skills that you have that really make the difference. And, I've been able to fly in space with a remarkable group of individuals on both space flights and know many, many astronauts from different parts of the world. And what's really exciting about being in an environment like that where competency is a determinator, you realize that you have an opportunity to work with people who are the best of the best. And there's nothing more incredible than being able to fly in space and bump into people on the space station that you've trained with, or flying in space with them, or flying in a T-38 with individuals. I've had some really remarkable flights in T-38s with really, really incredibly talented pilots. And it's something that I think is exciting to see happen.
One thing I would like to mention is just that there's a lot of talk about quality of life, and you have to keep in mind, no matter what profession you're in, and I think aviation is, since we're talking about it, where you have a job to do, and that you need to recognize that if you wanted to be treated as an equal, as a woman in a profession, to Dave's point about competency, but also not making excuses to not be at work. If you want to be at work, you're all in, and you have to be there and be present. And I think that's an important, maybe not popular viewpoint, that if we want to be considered equal, women really have to make the same grade and be at work when they're at work.
I think aviation, like aerospace and in my arena and flying in space as an astronaut, is a competency-based environment. And you owe it to yourself to be the best possible pilot that you can be. And as a result, you can choose to do whatever you need to do to be ready to be able to do that job. But understanding that when you arrive on a flight deck or you're flying in a small general aviation airplane, whether you're in a Cessna 150 or flying in a Boeing 787, you have an expectation for you as a pilot to be able to perform to not only the standards, but to bring your best possible performance. And there was an article that was in Flying Magazine years and years ago about the perfect flight. And, I think we all aspire to have that perfect flight where you rotate right at the exact point and you take off and you're climbing out at the selected climb rate, whatever that might be, whether you like VX or VY or whatever you've briefed. And I think it's a big challenge for all of us. But when we stand on the ground and we watch the snowbirds, we can all relate to that perfection, and that's what we aspire to. So trying to be the best that you can be, the only person you're letting down by not committing to your career is yourself.
Well said.
Very
Well said.
Yeah.
Now, finally, to end it off, what are you both looking forward to in the future, whether it be in your personal lives, your careers, your family, or the industry?
Enjoying retirement.
Enjoy. Which I want to buy an airplane, but
Dave needs to learn what retirement is.
Well, I assume that after such an extensive career, doing this for so many years and being a part of the best, if we could say that, like, it's probably hard to wind down. Is that true? Or has it been easy to transition into retirement?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I retired a few years ago, but I failed the course. I'm in remedial training right now. But in all sincerity, one of the greatest opportunities that we have at this point in our career is to be able to nominate others for awards, to get recognition for individuals, to help people who are aspiring to achieve their goals. And in my case, I've written a number of books, both for kids and for adults, that try and do that, to be able to share the experiences, because of course we can't answer every email that we get and turn up at every conference that we would like to be at. But it is a lot of fun being able to share our experiences and see others thrive in their journey. And there's nothing better than speaking to somebody and then 10 years later you get a letter or an email saying, I met you at this air show or whatever, and I went on to fill in the blank, whatever that was. And that's very rewarding to be able to have that happen.
That's a great answer, actually. I like that, where you mentoring the next generation and seeing young people thrive. And I feel very satisfied with my career, and I hope I can convey that a little bit to people coming up in the industry. I try and make myself available to people to answer any questions they have, and I won't sugarcoat it, Nobody says it's easy, but if it's your dream, it's very satisfying.
Were there any other points that the two of you wanted to add into the podcast, whether it be a question that we didn't already pose?
I'll just for myself say that I've been able to have a lot of dreams come true flying in space. What's exciting looking at the future is Canada will be part of going back to the moon. Jeremy Hansen is in the Artemis 2 flight. One of the crew, Ginny Sides, is back up. And the Canadian that one day will walk on the surface of Mars may be alive today. Maybe they're 5 or 6, 7 to 10 years of age. And they may be thinking that it's impossible for them to achieve their dream. But I think our shared message is it's not impossible. May be improbable, may require a huge amount of work and determination and things, but sometimes hanging in there and working through adversity does pay off. And I think that's a great message for people who are listening, thinking about their path in aviation, and hopefully they'll be able to fulfill their journey.
And I look forward to a time when I'm no longer considered a female pilot, but just a pilot who happens to be a female.
That's a great way to end it off. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank you both for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks very much for having us.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, that was a wonderful conversation. You guys gave great advice, great stories, and I think overall it was an inspirational conversation.
Yeah. At least for us. Very motivational.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
And now we return for landing with the end of episode 1 of the Blue Skies podcast, brought to you again by the Northern Lights Aero Foundation. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.